Yeah, I'm Dave Bennink with Reuse Consulting, and yeah, this is a great chance to kind of reflect. It's our 30th year anniversary was earlier this year, so it gave us a great chance to kind of reflect on on that time and what we've accomplished and who we've helped and how hard it's been along the way. So one of the things is that a lot of deconstruction is talked about in the terms of residential, but we have done a lot of other types of buildings, like you can see on the screen here, churches and schools and warehouses and, you know, steel structural buildings and all sorts of things. In fact, our goal is to focus on every building type that exists and give it a try and then learn from that and then share that with others. So if you were to think about all of the projects that we're involved in, I try, you know, it's again 30 years. You're thinking, you're kind of reflecting on that, and so an intern did some calculations and determined that we've saved and reclaimed the equivalent of 10,000 acres of standing forest. And I know that's a big number. I know that's a lot of wood. I know that I've saved a lot of wood because buildings are generally made of wood. So and we've saved a lot of buildings, not just through the work that I physically have done, but our businesses and all the projects that we've consulted on, which, you know, often involves an army of workers. So we saved a lot of wood, and but what are we really doing? This is kind of an overview of the deconstruction methodology of building removal. And so what we're doing essentially is taking buildings apart and selling the parts, or giving the parts away, or giving them back to the owner who owns them in the first place. So they can be reused in the new building. I don't know. It's every project is something different. But really what we're doing is we're trying to maximize reuse and recycling. Now we take apart buildings and we take apart other structures too, like bridges and fences or whatever we come across. And sometimes the idea of deconstruction gets expanded into other things like products, you know, like a car or a store display or something like that. And you know, there's a lot of concern of architects that deal with retail, and their work only lasts about 5 years and then it gets cycled out. And, you know, so there's been a lot of talk about deconstruction of things like displays, so that the display may look different in the future, but the core of it is reused. Ideas like that. And of course, we quickly adopted the idea of saving assemblies instead of just parts. Now, this building you see here is kind of unique, but it's really just a bunch of parts. We considered trying to save a floor, like one floor of it, as an assembly, as a module, actually. But in this case, we didn't do that. I have more examples of that coming up. But, you know, one of the things people are always wondering, like, how could you possibly compete with mechanical demolition when you're talking about people being or competing with machines? What kind of competition is that? Well, we'll get into that as well. But one of the things that I always tell people is, the advantage that I have is I'm getting paid twice. We're getting paid to remove the building. And if a demolition crew is getting 20,000 to remove a structure, then we should get 20,000 to remove the structure at least. And if we get that money and then we sell the products for 20,000, then we really collected 40,000. And I just say that as round numbers to try and help people understand what it is that makes this competitive, how we somehow find ourselves at having completed over 5,000 projects now actually in 44 states and 5 provinces. So we're not just doing this in the Northwest. So a couple of factoids that kind of support the idea of deconstruction. we went to the EPA and found out that the average American wastes about 4.9 pounds a day for their entire life, theoretically, right? And let's say they live over 70 years, it's going to add up. It's going to add up to, say, 136,000 pounds. And then I had completed a study for Seattle Public Utilities in King County, where we studied one of the buildings we took down, an average American home, as a matter of fact. And it turned out that building weighed about 135,000 pounds. So the bottom line is, you probably have already read it before I got to it, but demolition of one average American home is equivalent to a lifetime's worth of waste. So if you choose demolition, then you choose your entire allotment of waste all in one day. And when we share that with clients, it really is impactful for a lot of them. They tend to really consider deconstruction at that point, because it's striking to them just how wasteful demolition is. But you've got to come up with a viable and economically viable alternative to demolition, right? So now, for those of you that think of things more beyond just dollars and cents, we participated in a forest products lab study, as several others did, and the idea was to compare reclaimed wood with new lumber, and in this case, framing and flooring versus reclaimed framing and flooring. And the comparisons were as I expected them. The new lumber took about 11 to 13 times more energy to produce. It created about 3 to 5 times more greenhouse gas emissions, and you had to cut down essentially millions of trees, whereas we cut down no trees. So those are just some comparisons to help incentivize you to choose deconstruction. And so, like I said, it's been 30 years. I start reflecting, right? I start looking back and saying, what was this like in the beginning in 1993, and what is it like today? And here's what I've seen. These are just observations. The number of buildings out there in the world, there's more buildings than ever. The quality of materials, and we are gauging that off of a 213-year span. From the oldest building we've done to the newest materials in the stores. And so we see the number of buildings increasing, and we see the quality of materials in those buildings decreasing. And we see the ability to recycle materials decreasing, often because of adhesives or spray foam insulation or composites and things like that are hard to recycle or reuse often. And so those are not good trends. But one of the things that could interest an architect, designer, or contractor would be that the age of the buildings when they're being demolished is decreasing. And so here's again, these are not funded studies or anything like that. These are just our observations from our subset of projects. And if you look at this trend of buildings that we've worked on, it's decreasing. And what that means, of course, is that the average age of the building that we're disassembling is decreasing. And so the buildings that you're about to build perhaps will not make that 100-year benchmark that you're hoping for. Maybe it's only going to make it 50 years. And so when you do your embodied carbon metrics and comparisons with maintaining, with other energy inputs that are needed, operational carbon, you might want to base that on 50 years, and it changes the graphs drastically, and embodied carbon becomes much more important, much more of a factor when the building is only 50 years old. And a lot of the buildings we've taken down are exactly that. We did get involved in a project where they took 18 months to build a building, and after 18 months of operation, it was torn down. So the building only lasted 18 months. Pretty scary. So, but what are some of the problems to deconstruction? I mean, this is year 31, and we're still struggling to get everyone to accept deconstruction as an alternative, as a sustainable alternative to demolition. And you know, I mean, I understand these issues. I don't downplay them. Someone will say, I have a construction loan. Every time is money. The longer that I sit on this project, the more it's costing me. And just, you know, the time, often the clock starts ticking at when the permit is issued for people. And at that point, a lot of them have been waiting for a month, maybe a year, maybe longer to get their permit. And the problem is that they are very agitated at that point and ready to move. And demolition is a soothing option for them. The fact that they know that so much progress is done in less than a week. The entire building is removed, the foundation, it's cleared off, things like that. And so so they equate that as progress. And so that's a problem for us because we can't move as fast. And so the other thing is they assume, remember, everyone is assuming that deconstruction costs too much and it takes too long. And we had one project where the homeowner they had their heart set on this nice refrigerator. Our price was $700 more than the demolition contractor, and they chose demolition because they wanted the upgraded refrigerator. So they destroyed their entire building so they could have a nicer refrigerator in their new home. Wow. Those are the kind of things that I'm fighting on for 30 years, I've been fighting these things. So what did we have to do? The first building we did took 3.5 weeks. If we did that building today, I would be disappointed if it took longer than 3.5 days. So we've gotten faster because we're more efficient and because we've learned a lot about how to do this work. And in doing so, we use less labor, which is our biggest expense. So therefore, we don't have to charge as much. And it's actually put that combined with getting paid twice, we have been able to keep our prices competitive with demolition. How else could you explain 5,000 projects unless we were cost competitive and time competitive with demolition? Okay. We also have been working on this idea, which is this is working on it. We've been doing it for 20 years now. The post-fab panels, we don't call them prefab panels, right? They don't go to a building, they come from a building. So they're called post-fab panels. We sell walls, we sell floor panels. We reuse or see that engineered trusses get reused. Usually have to have an engineer sign off on something like that. But what it's done is it actually took those numbers from earlier and we tried to come up with some estimates now of how much better it is, because we're not generating 2x4s now, we're generating assemblies, and those require less energy to take apart and less energy to put back together. So the energy and greenhouse gas comparisons are even more favorable now when you consider that. So here's my final slide. So what do you do with all this material? We've helped almost 200 reuse businesses, and a lot of them sell the materials, right? They don't just take out the materials, they have to sell them. They have to do something with them. So they might run a used Home Depot, for, if you want to call it that. And so we've developed this new concept of what we call the Reuse Innovation Center. And now it's not just a reuse store anymore, it's a reuse center. And so we are taking buildings apart and we're processing the parts and we're distributing them in throughout the warehouse or the reclaimed lumber yard and selling them, or we have matched up with local craftspeople and artists, and they are taking in some of that supply and making products out of it, which sell in our showroom. And so this is something that we've had to do to try and instead of being these little tiny businesses that can't compete and are struggling, we're joining together to create these almost like a business cooperative where you're all working together. It covers everything from deconstruction, transportation, warehousing, retail, remanufacturing. We also do repair and recycling. And finally, reinstallation. So we try to partner with contractors who are willing to install reclaimed flooring in a new building, who believe in this and are not going to complain about having to deal with reclaimed materials or upcharge people for no reason. So the Reuse Innovation Center, I bring this slide up because we now have 10 different locations that are considering it. And we hope to have a total of 4 started by the end of this year. And there's one of them. And you look at the materials and you're like, what in the world? It looks like a bunch of collection of stuff. And that's exactly what it is. It's just a collection of materials that come from these sites. It's very hard to keep it organized and so on. So, and that's it for me.